So thank you all so much. I know our crowd is shifting a little bit. It's been nice to see a full room all day, but I don't know if it's the same people. But anyway, welcome if you're new, and thank you for staying if you've been here the whole day. I understand some people do not know why we have shoes. They're not for sale. We started the day with a film of little Amal, who is the 12-year-old, well, she's a puppet, a 12-foot puppet of a 10-year-old Syrian refugee, unaccompanied child who's traveling the world and looking for her mother and a place to sleep. And little Amal has been traveling throughout the world, and this week she was in Washington. And our brilliant colleagues from the Georgetown Laboratory on Global Performance and Politics were asked, because of their skill in doing public performance, to orchestrate her trek to the Capitol. So we showed a movie in the morning of little Amal, 12 foot tall, walking down Pennsylvania Avenue with a crowd of people. And as little Amal was walking down Pennsylvania Avenue, she was walking through a sea of Mylar blankets. Rather evocative scene for those of you who've been working at the southern border or on the beaches of Greece. And as Amal is walking through this sea of Mylar blankets, a little child on an older man's shoulder gives her a shoe. And she's like, "What's this shoe?" And the little boy holds one shoe attached with a lace to another shoe, and he's listening to one side and she's listening to the other. And what they hear is the story of children on the move. And as they're walking down Pennsylvania Avenue toward the Capitol, more and more shoes appear. And Amal realizes all of these shoes are carrying stories. Oh my God, I'm going to the Capitol. Help me carry these stories with shoes to the Capitol. So there was a huge procession down Pennsylvania Avenue, led by a 12-foot, 10-year-old girl carrying shoes. And they put the shoes out in front of the Capitol building. And when they got there, the shoes spoke, and the recordings of young people who'd experienced migration and displacement were sounded to the Capitol, and we did have some representatives there. So I don't know if Emma Jaster is still here in the audience. Emma, are you here? She was here. It was an extraordinary performance. We have a video of it. We'll make sure you guys see it. Incredible. So that really, and what was so beautiful was we asked the representatives, when you speak to her as a 10-year-old child, and you could see they came with their scripts. And then they met her, and she's the most expressive puppet you'll ever see. And they were like, forget it. Forget the scripts. And they just talked to her like a child. And it was extraordinary. And to see that happen in Washington is like, okay, this is a new day. So to end that beautiful experience with this conversation this week, the child-focused conversation, is what we're all about. So the shoes are here because shoes is the theme of the week, children on the move. And we also have, I noticed they're not yet opened. I mean, don't be so stodgy, guys. There are crayons on the table. The crayons are to connect you with your childhood self. They're also to write on the cards a reflection of young people you've known who've migrated, or some memories you might have had as a child migrating. And so write them and put them in the shoes. They're all around the room. So do that before you go, just to center yourself in the purpose of this week, this day, and our lives. Okay, so this conversation now moves from the federal kind of global policy world to the local community. And as it turns out, DC is one of the highest receiving areas in the country for both refugees and migrant children and families, right? So we have here people who are working at the local level, both within government and civil society, to talk about what it means for children coming into our area. And one of the things that's interesting is, when you talk to kids who've experienced migration, they often refer to I was at this place for a number of times, and I kind of got it figured out, and then I had to move to this place. Maybe you're in Guatemala, and then you get to the Mexican border, and you've figured out that step. And then you have to go through ORR, and you get used to that system. And then you go to Florida, and then you land in Maryland. And every city, every state has a different way of being with you and interacting and different acronyms. So imagine if you're a kid on the move, especially if you're alone without a caregiver, what does that feel like? So our conversation in this panel is about what that feels like on the response end and the receiving end in the Washington metro area. So I'm going to begin, first of all, with Essie Werke, who is now leading a consulting group, Multicultural Coaching. But Essie has a long experience, starting with lived experience. Well, not starting with lived experience. You weren't born as a refugee, but you experienced displacement and migration as a young person. And then she went through a number of other things, but she also worked in the federal government for the Office of Refugee Resettlement and then the Migration Policy Institute, and now she's sort of advising a number of actors. But Essie has also written some of the most comprehensive work, I think, on what our policies look like across the country in terms of providing better care and services for young people. So I wanted to ask you if you could kind of just frame this. How do we have a system? So kids come in and they encounter ORR or something else, but then what do they get? I mean, is there a system for states? Is there a system for counties that are receiving large numbers of kids? How do these things get set up and stood up and coordinated?
Yes, these are all the million-dollar questions. First, Gillian, I just want to thank you and your colleagues and partners for hosting this event and the conversation and the prompt to really center ourselves in our own childhood experiences. As Gillian said, I'm an asylee. I came to the United States when I was 4 years old. And I remembered, just because of that prompt, we had to make a decision as a family. We were already separated. My father was in the US and my mom and siblings were in Ethiopia. And we didn't want to leave our extended family because they are not extended in our eyes. And so there was a debate about which of the kids were going to go and which of the kids weren't going to go. So I wanted to share that with all of you as a way of bringing myself back to that moment. Very quickly, before I go to the question of is there a system or not, I also want to bring in the voice of some young people, young migrants who I interviewed some years ago. And building on what you just said, Gillian, their experience was, I am overwhelmed with all that has to be done and the crazy systems that have to be navigated. And what I really need is someone to stand with me. I just need someone to walk this out with me. So that's what I think about when I see these shoes and when I hear the story of Amal and so forth. But to answer the questions, in short, I would say at best, it's a woven quilt, the systems that are available at the federal, state, local levels. There's starting to be a nascent, an emerging woven quilt of services that are coordinated and available to these young people. At worst, though, I find it to be a bit of the wild, wild west, where everyone is doing whatever they can do, if anything at all. It's very random and chaotic, which makes it quite challenging at any age to figure out what's happening. Now, a lot of different factors at the community level will determine what's going on and whether it's a quilt or the wild, wild west. For example, in rural areas compared to urban areas. In rural areas, services are more sparse. They're less available, and even the ones that are available may not have language access. There may be an increased reliance on technology. Another factor is public benefits. Public benefits are often decided at the state and local level, and they're tied to immigration status. So depending on what that local community has decided in terms of public benefit policies and eligibility, the landscape is going to be completely different. So one size does not fit all. Another factor that I have noticed through the course of my research is how long has a group from a specific country or culture been in that location? The longer they've been there, the more established they are, the more time that community has experienced to build up its advocates and to create change. But it's not something that can be done in a year or 2 years. It often takes 5, 10 years to create a coordinated system. Now, having said all of that, there is some good news. There are some resources at the federal, state, and local levels, and I'll talk about those briefly. A key part of the way the federal government approaches unaccompanied children and children on the move is when are those kids the government's responsibility, and when are those kids no longer the responsibility of the government? That decides everything. While the kids are in government care, there's a lot of money, there's a lot of rules, there's a lot of oversight. It's not perfect, as we all know from the news, but there is a system, a well-established system there. Now, when children leave the federal government and they go into the communities, there's a brief handoff period. You know, they have things like a 30-day call, a national hotline, and as the previous panel mentioned, post-release services, which basically means typically short-term case management services. In some cases, those case management services can last for many years, but usually it's about 90 days. In any case, that's what's available as the transition from federal custody to community custody, if you will. Then there are other sources. If we're looking for funding, the US Department of Education provides money through different Title I, migrant education, and so forth. Foundations provide some money. Foundations, in my experience, provide money to these causes when there's a lot of interest and attention. But foundations have limited money and cannot be compared to government as well, so that money may not always be available depending on what else is going on. So it's sometimes there, sometimes not there. So then what happens? What happens to these children, young people, once they're in the community? Imagine in your own home, if no one is assigned the job of doing the laundry, or in your office, if no one is assigned to do the budget reconciliation, for example, what happens? Typically nothing. The job doesn't get done because there isn't a specific person assigned to it. That's the way I see it when kids are going into the communities. They have their sponsors, of course, often family members, but there isn't a specific entity across the country in every state and every city that has this responsibility. There isn't that coordinated system. But because of the compassion and hard work of the American people, there are groups that have taken on the responsibility even though it wasn't explicitly theirs. And these groups have formed in some areas coalitions. So it might be, members of the coalition might be physicians, therapists, school personnel, including teachers, all these different service providers at the local level. The most efficient way of coordinating services that I've seen is to establish some kind of a task force or working group so that people can send referrals within that coalition and have warm handoffs, and so that they can advocate and change what the rules are at the local level. One example of this is in Harris County or Houston, Texas. So the coalition there, and some of you may be familiar with this, they work together to find a way to get young people an ID card, a government-issued ID card, which we know opens doors like nothing else. And the way that they did it was quite creative. Part of the coalition member was the library. The library will give ID cards, photo ID cards. They enhanced the library card so that it meets all of the requirements for public benefits or whatever else. And so now the young people in Harris County are able to have an official government photo ID. There are many other examples, but I don't want to take too much time.
We're going to cover some of them here. Yeah,
okay, yes.
Yeah. Thank you. And we'll
Sure.
come back to conversation about some of this, but thank you. Look her up. There's some great resources. There's a QR code on the back of your agenda. And if you look that up, there's a whole list of resources it's not absolutely comprehensive, but it's pretty comprehensive, and Essie's report is in there from MPI. Thank you. So I'm going to move to Bibi Otero, who I had the pleasure of working with in Montgomery County. You're now an advisor to the county executive and the county government, which has started an interesting initiative. But you also have a background in DC on these issues with the school system, and you also have lived experience. So can you tell us a little bit about the interagency initiative in Montgomery County and how that's been supported? Where is the funding from? Is there any state support for Montgomery County's response? Montgomery County was the 11th highest receiving area in the country for unaccompanied migrant children being released to sponsors. And how do you coordinate with other local jurisdictions like DC?
So lots of questions there.
Yeah,
Thank
sorry.
you. Thank
You have 5
very
minutes
much
now.
for 5 minutes to say that. Thank you very much for having me and for putting this on. I think I want to get at it from a couple of different perspectives. Certainly Montgomery County, which is adjacent to the District of Columbia. There are 2 counties in Maryland that are adjacent to the district, which is Prince George's County and Montgomery County. Montgomery County is also one of the wealthiest counties in the country, next to Fairfax, and certainly in this area, Fairfax and Montgomery County. And it's a county that's been very progressive, so that they've had open doors for immigrants for many, many years. And back in 2009, 10, we had, as some of you may recall, a real surge of unaccompanied minors into this region. And at that time, I was serving as deputy mayor of the District of Columbia. Now I'm doing work in Montgomery County. But at that time, we worked with both in DC and Montgomery County to develop newcomer types of initiatives for the young people coming into the area. So Montgomery County had a newcomers program. And in fact, 3 years ago, Jillian was helping us kind of revamp that program as we were thinking that potentially there would be additional unaccompanied minors coming in. It's been a shift. So the unaccompanied minor program was really set up to receive young people and to make sure that the local institutions were prepared. We heard all this national policy work, and what is really important to think about is how is all of that operationalized at the hyper-local level? The county, the public school in that county that has a school board, that has all the sets of regulations, et cetera. Does it have the capacity? Does it have the cultural competence, the linguistic competence to be able to, the language access issues? Are there folks who can receive young people into the schools? And I have a long history of having worked with youth and immigrants. And I recall very much in the 90s in this city when we had no services for young people. I came to the US in the 60s at the age of 10 and was thrown into school where there was no access. I spent 2 years learning how to count because and going to high school and having the high school counselor say, you're not college material. You have an accent, whatever, maybe you could go into sewing. No lie. I liked sewing, but I liked other things. But the reality is that if our institutions aren't ready for children, we can go all of these policies, and then real day-to-day life happens. And day-to-day life is, where do I get health care? Where do I go to school? Do I have access to the recreation center? And does anybody in that recreation look like me? Do I know how to get online to apply to be on that basketball team? Are there more kids that look like me? So that part of it is what we need to worry about at the local level and to make sure that our institutions are ready. In Montgomery County, the newcomers, we created a positive youth development program, worked really closely with staff that we had trained in positive youth development to be able to work with young people. One of the things we saw in the 90s was young people not receiving the services and turning into gangs. Because one of the things that kids need is having a family. And whatever that family looks like, it's not necessarily even when they have a sponsor, the need for having connection with somebody who looks like you, understands you, knows who you are, and is meeting some of your needs. I think that was the really critical piece. fast forward to where we are today, and we have the shift in terms of the buses that have been, that the governor in Texas has begun to, not begun, but it's been a year and a half, has been sending to this region. And what we've now had to shift some of our programs to work with the families and the young children. We're seeing a lot of young children coming with families. And so how do we respond to that from the minute that we receive those families? Because those are children in the move, even if they're with a parent or two, or both parents or a family member, they are still children in the move. And how do we make sure that we're not just addressing the family needs, but the children's needs? And so from the time of reception, where they may come to our reception center, they may come to our respite center. How is that established in a way where young children are receiving, at the same time as their parents are receiving the services, know your rights, and how do we, where do you ultimately want to settle? We want to make sure that children are also being attended to in terms of their healthcare needs, their psychosocial needs, and have a place. So wherever we're receiving, there needs to be a place that is specifically for the children. I think that's a really important piece.
That is an important. I want to ask one question about funding, picking up on Essie's point, given that there's not really a system, right? Once
Yes,
the federal
there's no
government is
system.
like, okay, you're out of our care, now you're going to Montgomery County, and Montgomery County stands up a response, but who funds it? Are you getting funded by the state? How are you doing this?
So there were multiple pieces there, and I think first the political will, as we heard earlier. Our county council and county executive said, absolutely, we need to do something, and in fact, put it in the budget, both the piece for our newcomers, and as we saw this new surge of folks coming into the county, they put in $6 million to initially do some put some resources in place through our human services. We then very quickly mobilized to work both with the district and to work with the federal government, because we knew FEMA could fund some of this. So we have some FEMA dollars. We have, and now more recently, the state. But it's a lot of local work to get each of them to support, and it's not always very coordinated. And the one, and some foundation money, but it's been really tough to get both the state, the local, and the federal money to work together in a continuum, so that we can provide all the services that are needed for the families that are coming.
So this girl who wasn't meant to go to college actually happens to be extremely resourceful and has, I mean, if you don't have somebody like Bibi Otero in your county, good luck getting the federal support and the state support. I mean, she is sort of a machine making those kind of things happen, which I think points back to the resourcefulness of people who've experienced migration in their early lives. They know how to get things done. Thank you, Bibi. Okay, I'm going to move to Tatiana, who can speak from the DC side. So the DC mayor's office created your position about a year ago?
Yeah.
Yeah, in response primarily to the people coming in on the buses, right? So can you speak to us about how the situation is, how it has been in the last year and a half, how DC is responding, especially to newcomer children?
Okay, well, thank you. So it's been definitely a year that has given me a lot of gray hair. Where we were back then and where we are now, there's been a tremendous shift, very big progress, but there's a lot to do. We have a lot of questions that are not answered and a lot of policies that need to be changed, implemented, and funded so that we can provide services for these families. Where we are now, we've received we estimate that the district has received about 15,000 migrants in total since the busing began. And that created a pull factor from families that did not know that the district or this area would be a possibility to start their new life here in the U.S. So now we not only do we have buses coming, but we have individuals coming or family groups coming by their own means. They go to a welcome center somewhere near the border, they request to come to the district, and then they show up at our doors. We are seeing anywhere between 700 and 1,000 migrants a month arriving to the district in this mix of arrival methods. And our office has provided services to over 500 family groups. So the Office of Migrant Services it's centered on family groups and the nuclear family, but we are also part of the Family Services Agency within DHS. And one of the great things of being part of FSA is that we can leverage other programs that are within the agency to bring in more, not more supplies, more funding or more resources to our families. So how can we support the children? And our main purpose is to stabilize the family. So how can we help these parents as they are opening the new chapter for their family life? And as a migrant myself, I know how important it is to have your parents in a stable position, because that really opens up the next phase for you. I arrived to the U.S. when I was 15 years old, but of course with great privilege, because my dad had a visa to work as a teacher. But we did live in some interesting situations at the beginning. So again, maintaining that family unit is critical to not get lost within. As Vivi said, very easy to belong to the wrong group just because you have sense of nothing else or no more support. So we provide case management, and as I said, nothing is perfect, but we've been able to work really closely with our providers to really shape what is needed. And we've been able to move from the emergency response to a more programmatic effort. And we continue to evaluate day to day, working extremely, with our ears on the ground, and sometimes interacting a lot with our families and our providers to see where we need to improve. We also help families travel to their final destination, and that's via our nonprofit partners. And the key element to our efforts is collaboration with other with other jurisdictions like Montgomery County. We have a very close collaboration with the nonprofits that are providing the services contracted through our local governments. And then also, how do we leverage the larger community? How do we involve them? So there's 3 levels: the interjurisdictional, the interagency within the district. How do we work with DCPS, with the public library, with the Office of Vital Records, for example, so that we can support their families? And then how do we engage the community-based organizations?
That's a good lead to Amy.
Yes.
If I might. Yeah, thanks. So Amy Fisher is a core organizer with the Migrant Solidarity Mutual Aid Network here in DC, and she's also the director of refugee and migrant rights with Amnesty International. So all around the world, the front line of child protection is often at the community level. As the young people this morning talked about, it's sort of this frontline response, which is sometimes quicker, right, and voluntary, not with a lot of resources, except human will, but often provides a very early response to newcomer children. So how does that look from your perspective in DC, especially with regard to the kids?
So, the Migrant Solidarity Mutual Aid, we came together specifically to respond to the busing of folks from the border. And so I remember when, we first started seeing buses arriving to Union Station in DC from Texas. There was sort of this group of a handful of crazy people that would just sort of be on different street corners around Union Station trying to spot, a charter bus that looks like it could be a charter bus full of migrants from Texas. And eventually we sort of were able to, one, build communication with NGOs in Texas to know, when buses were coming, how many people on buses were coming, but also to really build out a network to provide solidarity to the folks that were arriving on buses. And, we, as a mutual aid group, really approach the work that we do through this idea of solidarity, that the migrants, whether they're kids, whether they're families, whether they're single adults, when they're coming to this area, we want to treat them as equals. We want to ensure that we are meeting them where they are at and building resources based upon what they're telling us are their biggest needs. And so in the early days, that started out as sort of building a reception system, right? So we, built this network that, has hundreds of volunteers and dozens of community partners and faith partners. And we said, when people get off the buses, what do they need? So we built partnerships with churches so that they could go in, they could get clothes, they could get good food. The kiddos could have access to toys, people could wash up and have hygiene kits. And at first, the message from the local governments is that everybody arriving on the buses is leaving. They're not staying in DC, they're all traveling elsewhere. And what we knew is that wasn't true. And so immediately when there was no shelter for folks, what we started doing is finding individuals to open up their homes, started paying for Airbnbs and hotels to make sure that people had somewhere to stay. And it was, also doing a lot of advocacy to push the district government to, open this office that opened in October of last year to provide shelter for folks. And, I think one of the amazing things that we have been able to do, and I think, I'm here a little bit wearing two hats of Amnesty International, is that DC was the first city to start receiving these busing programs. And, Governor Abbott started doing these programs with the cruelest, most racist, most xenophobic intentions of trying to, boot migrants out of Texas, right? And that these people are invading, we need to send them to liberal cities. And what happened was has been a beautiful response in DC and a beautiful response nationally. So when we got a heads up from our friends in Texas that buses were gonna start going to New York, we were able to reach out to community partners in New York to make sure that as buses started going to New York, to Chicago, to Philadelphia, to LA, to Denver, that every single city that these governors were trying to pick to send people, there would be community groups on the ground. When I am getting emails from community partners, from in Amnesty, I got an email just yesterday of a 17-year-old trans girl in Iraq who is trying to seek safety. And I said, well, I know everybody. Like, let me send some emails, across folks that work in these populations to see if we can find somebody to sponsor a 17-year-old trans girl who's trying to seek safety from Iraq. And so much of this community partnership has been so critical. And I think, in the beginning, it was very, us kind of making things up as we've gone. And I think within the last 6 months or so, there has been a real significant shift in the work that we're doing. So in April of this year, the DC government stopped providing long-term shelter for families. So in DC, there are 3 different hotels that provide longer-term shelter for families that don't have sponsors, that don't have anywhere to go. And there was a decision to stop doing that in April. I think initially it was a decision based upon capacity, but now that there is capacity, they're not admitting new families. And so over the last 6 months or so, so much of our work has been to support this growing population of unhoused families that are in our district and in the sort of DMV writ large. And so a lot of this is like daily phone calls of people that have been kicked out of the shelters and are now living on the streets, and knowing that there's a 6-month-old baby that's sleeping here, there's a 6-year-old sleeping here, a 19-year-old child who's pregnant, is kicked out on the streets and sleeping here. And, we know that there are growing numbers of folks that are sleeping in the streets, sleeping in cars, sleeping in packed houses and apartments because there's nowhere else for them to go. And so much of our work has been trying to mobilize local communities so that where possible, people will have homestays, so that they can, if they're sleeping on the streets, at least they have blankets, at least they have food, at least they can go to a shower at a church. And it's been a real challenging shift to be able to, 1, find people as they are being removed from the shelters, and then 2, figuring out what are the services that we can provide when they're sort of being washed away by the other agencies. And I think, the community response to that has been incredible. And without the early community response, we would not have the infrastructure to really respond to this crisis moment that we've been in since April.
Thank you. So much work to do. Emma Israel is a policy analyst with Kids in Need of Defense, or KIND, and a translator, apparently, too. So thank you for your showing up with Isaiah this morning. You have played a key role in writing a law in DC that was especially useful to young newcomers. Can you talk a little bit about why that was needed, what it was, what it offered, and how hard it was to get it done?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start by saying I work at Kids in Need of Defense, which is a national and international now organization that provides attorneys to unaccompanied children. And so when we come at the work of policy, we're coming at it with that lens of like legal representation and making sure that kids, unaccompanied children who've recently arrived, have access to, first and foremost, immigration status in this country, but also we're keeping a keen eye on like other barriers that are preventing them from accessing resources in their new communities and sort of settling in. And one of those barriers that we have known about in DC for a long time, but sort of the opportunity to make a change on it came up recently, has to do with this federal immigration status known as Special Immigrant Juvenile Status. So Special Immigrant Juvenile Status is a humanitarian visa for young people under the age of 21 who are fleeing parental abandonment, abuse, or neglect, or sort of looking for humanitarian protection. And in recognition that maybe the federal government isn't the best agency or people to make the determinations about what's a safe place or a safe home for young people, the first step of that federal visa process is to go to the state court and seek a custody order or an order of protection where the state court says this child has been abandoned, abused, or neglected and shouldn't return to their home country. And in DC, for technical reasons that I could go into but won't, for a long time, young people over the age of 18 couldn't get into the state court to access that prerequisite order to apply for the federal protection. And it's actually interesting that a couple of times already on this panel and in the earlier one, we've heard people talk about different jurisdictions having different resources available, and you could live 30 minutes away and your access to things would be different. The opportunity to make this change actually came about when one of our attorneys mentioned in a meeting with the mayor's office, you know, in Maryland, young people can access this visa after they turn 18, and we lose a lot of young people who are in our school system and in our community because that's their only avenue for status, and they can't do it if they're living in the district, and so they move to Maryland. And the mayor's office was like, let's make that happen, let's change it. So we worked with community partners, including the Migrant Solidarity Mutual Aid Network and others, to write this bill. I can't take credit for that personally, but my colleagues are brilliant and wrote that bill, and were able to convince the city council and get that passed earlier this year. And I think for us, it's like a long time overdue. It's going to make a huge difference in the lives of young people in DC, and it also helps us like build this community in DC where we don't have kids who are graduating from our high schools leaving the district or going before they graduate high school leaving simply because they are looking for immigration status elsewhere. And then obviously it's a path to status for young people, which is a key to opening up so many other resources and protections for them in this area, hopefully.
Can you say how many young people have benefited since it was enacted?
It was enacted on September 1st.
Okay, so that's
So we're still a little new.
yesterday.
Yeah. So it just went into effect on September 1st. I know that KIND already has a wait list for cases, and that we've got some other partners that are just taking cases now, but it's a long process even once you get into the state court. So we're hopeful that we can get more cases into the court in the district over the coming months, but so far I think it's a little premature to say anyone's gotten a visa as a result of this law.
Okay, well, thank you. That's incredible. So now we'll turn to Dr. Eunice Humphrey, who's the principal of the International School in Prince George's County, where Amal, I understand, went and played basketball.
She did.
On Tuesday before walking to the Capitol. She dunked some hoops.
We danced. We did a little bit of everything. Hi, everyone. So first, thank you for inviting me. And then I'll say this. We're not where we want to be, but we're definitely on the move. So hang in there, right? I'm the principal of the International High School at Langley Park. Happy Hispanic Heritage Month to anybody that's out there that's Latino or Latina. I'll say this, right? I also have the same background. I grew up in Maryland, in Prince George's County, but I came here to the country when I was 2. My parents were fleeing, from El Salvador during a really difficult time. So I know what that's like. So when I came to this country, we actually came to Langley Park. So to now be the principal at the International High School Langley Park is full circle for me. So I'll say this, in the DMV area, DC, Maryland, Virginia, there are six international high schools. So the question is like, what's the difference with an international high school and a regular high school? Well, the difference is that we really take into consideration both Maslow's hierarchy of need, the making sure that our students feel safe, feel like they belong, feel that there's a place for them to have a voice. We create that environment because we know that if they don't have that, then it's going to be difficult for them to learn. So one thing that somebody asked earlier is, how do I get involved? Volunteer at the local schools. Come and be a part. We need substitutes. We need volunteers. We need people who are really going to listen to our students and make sure that their needs are being met. My school is 100% multilingual learners. Before it was English as second language, right? So everything keeps changing, all these acronyms. But now it's multilingual language learners. And so 100% of my students are from that population. And so I have students from Afghanistan, from China, all the way to Central America, South America, from the world. They're all international. One of the key things, I think, is understanding that, we have to collaborate with other people. I know a couple of ladies on this platform that I have reached out to and said, hey, I need your support. We cannot do the work alone. So our school is funded through our school system, but we also are a Title I school, which means that about 80+% of my students receive free and reduced meals, right? The other thing that we try to do is we really try to hone in on where are the areas or pockets of people who support undocumented students, right? So working closely with our local community colleges that take some of our students, looking for grants or scholarships that are going to support our students, right? That's important to us, and so we do some of that one-on-one work with them. Jimmy, who was here earlier, is one of my former students. I'm so proud of you. He's really somebody that has demonstrated that the program in our school works. And so we have increased graduation by 13%. 41 of our students, we were the largest increase in the state of Maryland of students who exited the WIDA or the Access Assessment, which assesses whether or not they know how to read, write, listen, and speak English. And so the programs work. I would say we need more international programs. We need more international high schools. And so I'm working with the Internationals Network now to really look into creating more programs for our students. And so I'm really happy to be here. One of the other things we need to start doing is looking for young people like the Georgetown Hoyas that I see here, for you guys to really also look into coming into our school systems, because you come in with a unique ability, right? So we know that now social media is a big thing. Bringing awareness to our schools and bringing awareness to our school systems is important. And so I will say I invite you to come and visit the schools, but then also if you want to become educators, become educators. I'm one of 6 principals that are from a Latina background in Prince George's County. We need more. We need more diversity. We need more diverse faces that sit on these decisions. We were at a meeting the other day and somebody said, well, they didn't agree with this, so this didn't happen. And I'm like, who's they? Who are the they? Can I be a they? Because if I'm a they, things are going to look different, right? And so thank you again. I mean, the reality of it is every district, every county, every school system is going to look different. But we need people that are willing to come into our schools, do needs assessments, and really see what are the needs. How do we make sure that the newcomers and that our immigrant students' voices are being heard? But not only that something is being done, because we've heard enough already. It's time to put the words into action. And so that's what we do at International High School.
Thank you. I actually want to ask you a follow-on question, picking up on Essie's comment about the patchwork quilt, right? So Prince George's County is part of Maryland.
It is.
Not every Maryland county has international schools.
Nope.
So where do you guys get the guidance? Is the state recommending that you do X, Y, and Z for newcomer students? And if Prince George's is doing it, is Montgomery County doing it? How does that work? Where does that guidance come from? Who decides?
Yeah, definitely. So we saw one of the things that happened is you use your data. So we saw that there was an increase coming of newcomers to Prince George's County. And so with that being said, the Internationals Network, which is like our umbrella organization, came into Prince George's County and said, look, we have some funding. If you all are willing to open up 2 schools, we're willing, we can help you all create the programs. And so the Internationals Network has these 5 principles that really look at working closely with students, where we look at language integration in every subject. So it's not just in one subject. I would invite Montgomery and all the other counties, and like I said, DC has 2 schools, Virginia has 2 schools, and then we have 2 schools. In total, there are 31 schools in the United States, but there's definitely a need for more. I would invite you all to reach out so that we can have a further dialogue as to how we can increase more of the international network and more international high schools, because like I said, it's not going to stop. We're going to continue to see this increase.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And then Priti Nampurtiri, you are the director of IRC, International Rescue Committee in Maryland. And your work involves refugee resettlement, asylum, but also integration support for refugees, migrants, and asylum seekers. So what does this mean at the practical level? Because you're serving different populations, and as we know from our first panel today with the young people, you get different things depending on where you come from. Like, even though you have similar experience, if you're a migrant, you don't get what a refugee has. If you're a refugee from here, you get something that somebody from there doesn't get. So how do you, as an organization providing services, how do you ensure that each child deserves whatever they need, no matter where they're from?
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be up here with everyone here, especially all of those who have lived experiences, and I think that's the goal, to get our youth to be able to sit up here and talk about their experiences and then take the leadership at the helm moving forward. I'm interested, was it the youth who said they got different things, or is it different panelists?
Well, I think both, right?
Yeah, that's
you
very-
didn't maybe say it explicitly, but
Yeah.
it came out.
It's very interesting. So I'll start with locally what we do as a network, and kind of talking through some of those things. I will also say there is a quilt weaving right here. I have been in connection in some way with all of these groups somehow in different capacities, whether it's through the local office or IRC as a national office. So that is there. It's how to make it stronger, how to make it more coordinated, and how to learn from our mistakes and our successes. So at the practical level, IRC in Maryland, we have offices in Silver Spring and serves predominantly Prince George's and Montgomery County, but in our legal services, also the DMV area. And then in Baltimore, Howard County, Baltimore City, Baltimore County. We see up to 5,000 people come through our doors a year, which is a lot of people. And what we do for our children, unfortunately, or we're fortunate to have funding, is dictated by the funding we have. Because the funding we have, the majority comes from the federal and state level, or passed through the federal level to the state, and the eligibility requirements are according to the status you have, predominantly what's called a humanitarian immigrant. So that's a refugee, an asylee, a victim of trafficking, secondary migrants, Cuban Haitian paroles and entrants. And so largely that's where our focus is, because that's where we have the funding to do so. So however, anyone who walks through our office, we will do an intake. We will do an assessment. We will see, can we provide anything? And if we can't, it is our network of folks that are up here, but also in the area we reach out to. We don't leave anyone without something to go towards. It is hard to say no, but we, as a nonprofit, are often resource poor. Everyone has the passion to do everything, but we don't have the money to do it. For the children that we can work with through our funding, and we do have diverse funding, like foundations who don't care about status. We do a bunch of different things. We help enroll children into school. like Dr. Eunice's school. We have to talk after this about a couple of things, and good things, right? We ensure they have the vaccinations. We provide interpretation. So we have a community interpretation program that not only serves to support our individual families that we work with, but we also are a vendor to other community partners across state lines if they need an interpretation program. So up to 40 different languages we have folks who can come on site and interpret for, and then we have people who can do it virtually. So, which is something that's a resource to ensure, and language is important. Understanding all of these benefits you have to navigate, understanding your first day of school, what it means to go to school, what it means to raise your hand to say, can I go to the bathroom, or when you wait in line. It depends on where children come from. Some have had a long education, some have never had an education. But we ensure we provide everyone with the same information, and that's ensuring that they start off with the same information and they have access and equity to that information when they get to school, and also support their parents for that. We have after-school programs, summer programs, mentor programs for children where we help them to integrate more into the community, to learn English, and also to think about what happens after high school. Do they, post-secondary, a lot of their parents want them to go to college. Is it viable? Do they have the money? Can we apply for funding for them to get into school? We also have a children's legal service department where we're representing unaccompanied minors who were released, who are now in removal proceedings, so to make sure that they have the protection to be able to stay in the country, and a host of other things. But at the center of it, for those who we can support, it's supporting the whole family and making sure there's a safety net, because and I don't know if my fellow panelists who have had this lived experience, the children are able to learn English quicker, they're able to adapt quicker. They often are helping their parents navigate the systems because of this. And the stresses that they see their parents trying to find a job, trying to balance it all, gets put back onto them. And so if we don't provide a safety net for all of them, it is the children who will fall through the cracks. And so that's really important in the work we do. Additionally, I will say when it comes to new populations, there are constantly new populations coming through. We see what's on the news. You see the migrants, you saw the Afghan evacuations, you saw the Ukrainians, but it's the folks that don't get that media attention where we struggle to really to find a voice for them, right? Or to help them, put their voice out there. And it's great to sit among partners in the DC government, Montgomery County, and I know Prince George's County, who are advocates for their voice. So right now, we see a huge influx of Haitians coming into our office. There is a significant delay to get them work authorization. That pressure is going on to their children. Their children are going into school, but I'm talking about 100 per month. That means the county systems are struggling to enroll on time. That means the health system, so the clinics that take Medicaid or offer free health care while we're waiting for Medicaid, their systems get overloaded. So it's thinking about all these things for our children, but making sure the children can be children, that they have a safe place to learn, to play, to grow, to think, because that's their story too.
Thank you. That's so important. So one of the things that's coming to mind is that I think it was in your report that you wrote about the federal funding, and this was related to the unaccompanied children. 86% of it was spent at the border. 14% of the federal budget for unaccompanied children goes to the communities. So in the end, these folks are, scraping together what they can and really weaving together this patchwork quilt based on will, very little federal funding, very little state funding. So it's really the resourcefulness. No wonder so many people have immigrant backgrounds with all this resourcefulness that you bring to the table. But it's kind of incredible if you think about it, that this is how it works, right? It's just connections and goodwill and grit. Yeah, thank you. So we have some time for questions, but I want to privilege questions coming from young people with lived experience. If any of you have them, no pressure, but you might. Go ahead, Berta. Wait for your mic, actually.
Two questions are kind of related. Off of what you just said about the fact that 80% of the federal funding goes toward, borders, and only about 14% goes to the community. Given that, we had lawmakers who are just, and policy makers who are just here, what is it that we can do to change that? Or what are you guys doing to make sure that gets changed so that that funding is evenly distributed? And then another question, it's on the fact that from our lived refugee experience, we know that there are so many organizations helping working with refugees, but we mentioned the service that's being provided, it's not even, it's not consistent. You could be from maybe an RRC in this city is providing these services, but in another city it's not. Or the fact that there's so many different agencies, this agency in the same city is providing this and this other is not. So is there actually a standardized way of providing service? And if it isn't, why does it not exist? And why are these services not consistent throughout? What are we doing to make that happen so that we make sure we are providing standardized resources that's consistent across the board?
Anybody?
I will say that. So let me talk about it from the government perspective, because I have multiple hats. I think it's really important for us to help members of our community understand how policy is made and how you can engage and do it. I'll give you a quick example. In Montgomery County, the county executive does budget forums before he prepares his budget to present to the council. This is one example. We've now gotten the budget office to do these forums in different languages. And so last night we had a forum in Spanish. It was a packed room, but it was up to our community organizations really to recruit the families. It was really interesting. A youth organization brought lots of young people. Obviously, there is a whole process behind that of helping young people understand the budget process and how. But hearing directly from the community, first of all, getting your policymakers to go to the community, and then hearing from the community what their needs and wants are over and over again. We always say that it takes about 6 times for people to hear something before they get it. It's no different from policymakers, right? And so that's a very small example, but there is the same kind of an example with school boards. There's the same example with city councils or county councils. So political activism is really important. I mean, this is where you get a policy change because you happen to have some folks who go into an office and go into a meeting with a mayor and so on. But it's that we have to get policies to change so that they are more consistent across groups. And so learning where those policies have gaps and getting those to change, I think is a really key piece of that. It's one piece, but it's a really key piece of that work. Because policymakers don't know what they don't know. And so it's really bringing to light that, for example, the need for them to increase at an international school into their jurisdiction, the fact that that model exists. Mm-hmm. So that's, and it's very hard to do that at the, when people are just arriving or they're trying to survive entering the policy world or whatever is still very far away from just meeting your basic needs. So I think it is really critical that you have people like us who have been in who have that lived experience and all, that are doing this policy work and bringing that to the table. I was saying that to Tatiana today. If we don't have people in high-level positions that have this lived experience and understand this, you know, final decisions are made in a room with people that don't look like us. So that's one possibility.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
I think you wanted to go. I'll go after you. You can go first. It's fine. Okay. We're so polite, right? First of all, thank you for that question, because it's a very complex question that gets to the heart of some really important issues. First, the elephant in the room. Yeah, I mean, the immigration system in this country is broken and has been broken for decades. Second, the way that our legal system is set up around immigration, there is a underlying value and belief that people without certain statuses should not get access to public benefits, whether it's Medicaid or TANF or food stamps or whatever it is. There's a debate about that. You know, it's not necessarily, yes, everyone should get that. No, not everyone should get that. There's a lot of nuances, and we could have an entire day or two on that alone. And then finally, to answer your question more directly, there are some very, very basic standardized services that are available to everyone, regardless of status. And one is access to a free education, K through 12. Another is access to limited health care, but health care nonetheless through the federally qualified health centers, otherwise known as community health centers. So I just wanted to frame those two things. We're trying to put a Band-Aid on a much bigger problem, which is the immigration issue in our country, and we've been gridlocked. And there's a debate going on about what immigrants with status and without status really should have access to, except for the basic services of education and limited health care.
I think we also have a tendency in these conversations to sort of approach it from this scarcity mindset. And especially when we're looking at federal funding, I think that there are resources. It's just like it's a political choice as to where those resources are being spent. You know, I think for people that arrive as refugees, there is, you know, services for, let me be very clear, our refugee resettlement system, particularly during the Trump administration, was totally gutted. And I think you will not hear from anybody that works in refugee resettlement to be like, yes, everything is great, we don't need more resources, like, it's perfect.
I can attest to that.
Like, I don't think anybody will say that. However, you know, if you arrive as a refugee, you do have services. You are eligible for some things. You do get cash assistance. You get, you know, depending on where you're at, it's sort of an array of services. For asylum seekers, nothing, right? Like, until you're granted asylum, then you can be eligible for things. But as you know, as you are seeking asylum, as you are an asylum seeker, and until you're granted asylum, hopefully that is a process that typically takes years. And so, you know, right now we are in this political moment in which really the only funding, federal funding that exists for the resettlement of asylum seekers is through a program called the Shelter and Services Program. It previously used to live within the Federal Emergency Management, FEMA, and last fiscal year 2022, I think it was funded at about $150 million. For fiscal year 23, it got a significant increase to $800 million. And so that's the funding that, you know, DC was the first non-border city to receive this funding to help with the reception of asylum seekers that were being bused here from Texas. And that funding is so critical to this emergency, like an asylum seeker lands in X city and doesn't have anywhere to go, doesn't have food, and so border communities use it largely to help people, you know, when they're initially released from detention and then go onwards. And you know, that funding, once you've been in the country for 45 days, you're no longer eligible for it, right? And so that funding doesn't actually do anything to provide for this more medium to long-term integration. But also we're in this political moment in which, you know, we're about to face a government shutdown. The Senate wants to fund it at $600 million, which is $200 million less than last year, whereas the House wants to completely zero out the program. And then the United States is funneling billions upon billions of dollars into detention and enforcement and surveillance of immigrants. So right now, particularly when we're looking at families, we're seeing families that are coming across the border to seek safety, coming with ankle shackles, different types of surveillance technology attached to their bodies. There is this new family expedited removal program where people are getting deported within 30 days. I think the numbers that I saw this week is that there were over 200 families enrolled in this program deported just in the last week. And so there is just billions upon billions of dollars going into these programs to keep people out, to keep people detained, and next to no investment in how do we actually welcome them when they're here. And that is not a problem of scarcity, it is a problem of priorities.
Voila. Anybody want to end on a note of hope?
Sorry.
No. I mean,
Not the
no.
most
Give
cheerful.
Give it straight. Absolutely. And this room is full of hopeful people. So
I was going to add just two quick things to the question, and I think it's actually a hopefully hopeful way to follow that very true comment. But I think coming from the legal services side of things, where I am with Kind, we talk about this a lot in our team of how do we bring our clients and the folks with lived experience to the table, and then borrow. I think the question was about the network and sort of how is it different. So the first thing I wanted to say is I think that all of us play a really important role in bridging all those gaps. And I'll use the example of the bill that my colleagues wrote that I mentioned earlier. We didn't just come up with it from scratch. There are bills in other states that do this. Other states and other organizations have taken these steps to kind of fix this misalignment between state and federal law. And a very solid chunk of the bill that's now in effect in DC was borrowed from Washington State. We, changed the citations and things, but I think learning from our partners around the country is how us on the services and advocacy side can be part of it, or can be part of sort of bridging that gap. And then on bringing young people to the table, I also just want to bring in the side of unaccompanied minors, which, or unaccompanied children are in a really different posture than a lot of other migrants and migrant children specifically. And I think we are still grappling with, and I think that today is a good example of this, how to make sure that their voices are included and part of the policy and advocacy going forward. But we also, as their lawyers and as their advocates, need to be sure we do that in a way that doesn't put them in danger. Mm-hmm. And so that's something that our team works with a lot. And I want to say we had 2 young people provide their testimony on the bill that we passed earlier this year. But that conversation isn't just, can I walk up to a young person who I happen to know is undocumented and is in deportation proceedings and would be affected by this, and ask them to come before the council and say their name and say where they go to school and say how they're affected by this. That's not respecting them or putting them in a good way. So it's a hard and long process for us, at least, and we're still getting there, to figure out how to lift up those voices and bring them to the table in a way that's respectful of the youth's experience, but also protects them from this system that Amy was so eloquently describing, that's really not set up for them to be protected here.
yes, we have. I mean, now we have 2 minutes, and then we're cutting into break time. But yes.
Sorry, I'll be quick.
No,
One thing that I do is I work with the future, right? Mm-hmm. And I see a lot of future here. So one of your big thing is going to be to really start educating your counterparts, especially those that don't know how to speak up, right? So you all are going to have the opportunity to vote. You all are having the opportunity to teach people about immigrants, immigration rights. and all of the policies that are happening. Let's just talk about the elephant in the room. Racism is real, right? And so it is our job to really educate even those who we call friends and family about the importance about looking out for others. This country was created and has been incredibly supported and has been lifted by the voices and by the work of immigrants and refugees. So it's important for us to teach them that. I leave you with this quote from Martin Luther King. If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But keep moving forward. Thank you, guys.
I don't really have much more to say than what's already been said. Just to thank everyone who's still here. The room is very cold, and we've spent a long day together in a very cold room. But it's been so important and great to have our conversation today grounded by the experience of people who have experienced displacement, children on the move who they truly have been able to ground our discussion in a particular reality that we all need to kind of keep in mind as we move forward and go back into our little corners of the system where we all operate independently often and overlapping in some cases. Some of the overarching challenges that we've heard about today are really, this lack of political will that we experience. This is often at a very high level, and it's something that is systemic just as much as forced displacement itself is systemic, and something that often is a little bit beyond the scope of our day-to-day work. Nonetheless, it's essential to always keep in mind and consider. We've heard, several themes today that have really stuck out. This idea that policies have knock-on effects, that children are making decisions as part of family units. They're making decisions based on little to no information. Very quickly, movement can happen very quickly. And they're also playing roles in assisting their families and being an important part of helping their families and their communities in displacement as well. So as we discussed, listening and prioritizing the needs of children, this is due to their rights. They are rights holders. It is because the system itself owes a degree of accountability. Children are experts not only on their particular situations, but as we even heard from the young representatives in Cox's Bazar, there can be foreign policy experts as well, and be part of trying to push at a high level in these forums if they can be invited. Just in terms of next steps, we do have this policy brief. We are working on tightening that up. We will be summarizing all of the discussions here and sending that around and making it available. We are also very interested in continuing this discussion. So many rich things have been said today, and as we also look forward to the Global Refugee Forum in December, we aim to continue having more conversations with policymakers. We would be interested potentially in collaborating with people in this room, so please feel free to reach out to myself or other event organizers today. And then just maybe the final thing to touch on that I found particularly inspiring was this idea that the work at a local level is so important, and it's also so available to us. It's something that when we work on policy at a global level, sometimes it's easy to say, that's beyond my scope. I look at the system from a 50,000-foot view and so on. But we all live in communities. We all live in places where people are experiencing displacement. We can all reach out and learn who they are and get connected with mutual aid networks and see how else we can be a part of that response. So.